știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. самых окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
Марш левый, 2, 3, марш левый, 2, 3. Встать ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы извинить, и что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, 2, 3, марш левый, 2, 3. Встать ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, 2, 3, марш левый, 2, 3. Встать ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. In der Arbeiter Arbeitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Reitet ein in der
Утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Не стой, снегопад,
Greetings, everybody, and welcome along. Let me just move the exercise ball there out of the way. There we go. And this is, of course, a live stream dedicated to the latest from the special military operation and the ongoing shenanigans, shall we say, involving the Trump administration. The latest being the meeting in Budapest that is coming up, and the usual merry-go-round of people in the so-called multipolar world screaming that Trump's been a genius, he's outwitted everybody, he's got a plan, war's coming to an end, etc., etc. These people deserve the meme being awarded to them symbolically, the Fell For It Again prize, which is awarded to all of these clowns because they fall for the Trump bullshit every single time without fail. Just as, by the way, people on the left in the United States and elsewhere, but especially in the United States, fall for the Democrat bullshit every single time, or the Obama bullshit every single time. He's got a plan. He's going to do something. The hidden forces of insert enemy here, the deep state, the white racist regime. It's just those damn Tea Party Republicans stopping Barack Obama from unleashing New Deal 2, etc., etc. There's always an excuse for people who buy into the bullshit of the men who hold the office of president, who are mostly just figureheads. There is no real governing done. I think the last one to try and do something with the office was probably George H.W. Bush. Didn't end well for him, politically speaking. No, he got off a little more lightly than Richard Nixon, who was another one who tried, and much more likely than JFK. So I suppose you could say that the severity of this has gone down to a certain extent over the years. The point being, to get invested, as some people do, in the utterances of Donald Trump when it comes to the Russia war, is completely and utterly foolish. Yes, you should pay attention to what he says and what he does. After all, the office of the president is nominally, at least, a powerful institution. But as we know from many hours on these streams and from discussions with other thinkers and analysts such as Aaron Good, who we had recently on the Decline and Fall show, you'll know that the office of the president essentially is, in reality, what it says, which is it's a chief executive. Chief executive's powers in corporations vary depending upon the individual character of the chief executive, the support he has amongst the major shareholders, and the strength of the company and its product. Well, if we're going to continue the corporate analogy, the shareholders in the United States aren't exactly unified behind their chief executive. The product that they're selling to the world, the idea of U.S. imperialism and the idea practice of the unipolar order is becoming increasingly unappealing, and they're trying to desperately to cast about for ways to save this. I, of course, am talking here about the latest back and forth over the Ukraine war, involving, of course, the latest meeting between Trump and Zelensky, and of course the aforementioned upcoming summit in Budapest. Now, before we get to that, though, I will just ask you all, if you have not done so already, to be sure to like and share the stream. We are currently live on X and Kick and Rumble and YouTube, and of course now Substack, where I can see we've got 11 of you watching at the moment. So that's all good. Good to have with us. So we are starting off with a look at the latest from the war. Now, let's start with the military picture, because this is the crucial thing to bear in mind when looking at the utterance political leaders. See here, this is a deep state map. This is a pro-Ukrainian resource that, funnily enough, or not funnily for him, one of the organizers and I think one of the founders of this mapping group was recently drafted and sent off to the front line, apparently for posting updates that did not please Bankova, the presidential palace in Kiev. So be careful what you post, Ukrainians, as it turns out. So here I'm focused on these the upper section of the front line, and you can see here on the map. I'll just zoom in. This is around Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, two areas that we have discussed extensively before, and we've discussed that because these were, of course, areas where there was a lot of fighting 10 years ago in the initial uprisings in Donbass, and which represent really the final stage in the taking of all of Donetsk by the Russians. So what we see here is an encroaching cauldron situation. You can see along this front line here the red arrows representing Russian advances down here in Chasov Yar, Toretsk, etc. Up here towards, on the other side, Belitska, and up here you have the various arrows coming down towards Slavyansk and up from the south towards Kramatorsk. You have now there are some maps. I use the pro-NATO ones because they're obviously more conservative. Some of the pro-Russian maps have the Russian forces much closer to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. Let's split the difference and say it's about halfway. Either way, and this is again a pro-NATO map, this doesn't look good, because if the Russians do push on here and cut this area off, there are apparently tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops there. Zelensky and Syrsky, in their usual way, have forbade retreats. They have decided that again, or they are fronting up a decision, shall we say, that says that everyone must fight to the last man, no retreat, no matter what. It's basically it's the cliched version of what so-called historians in the West present as the Soviet tactics in World War II, which are actually far more adept and far more adroit than they are given credit for in the West these days. Scholarship on World War II used to be a bit more serious when the Soviet Union existed. But if it is the case that the Russians do manage within the next few weeks to cut off this area where I'm hovering the cursor over there, that'll be a severe defeat for the NATO forces, taking all of this area here, trapping possibly tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops in there. That would be a disaster. And it is this impending disaster which is, of course, prompt kinds of flurries of activity. So even when all the back and forth was going on a few weeks ago in August and September, between the Trump administration and Putin and the Russian government, this did not stop the Russian advances into this particular area, and the US, of course, knows that, and so are trying to get some kind of settlement before this disaster closes in on them. Now, this is one of the reasons why, I'll just stop sharing that map there. This is one of the reasons why you've got things like the threats by Trump recently to unleash Tomahawk missiles on Russia via giving them to Ukraine. Now, I'm told that this is something which is a lot more difficult to do than just simply handing over a missile, because you can't just give a missile system to Ukraine. It would need the launcher systems to go with it. The Tomahawk cruise missile, I mean, you can find the technical specifications easily online. needs launchers, of course. There's a lot of them. The US has used them very extensively since they came into service, which was quite a number of decades ago now. They were, I believe, first brought in or designed as work that was done in the 1970s by General Dynamics. So they've been active at least 40 years since the 1980s. But they need launcher systems, and US mostly launches them from their naval vessels. See, if you remember back when the US used to do its bombing campaigns against Iraq and other places, it was always talk of Tomahawk cruise missiles being launched from destroyers, back in the day, battleships, also cruise missiles launched from US nuclear submarines. So these mainly the US Navy, which has launched this over the past few decades, can be launched from missile launchers on the ground, though. Recently, there is an updated ground launch system called the Typhoon missile system, which is a ground-based launcher, only been in service with the US Army since 2023. So they would need to give, presumably, this ground-based launch system or some version of it to Ukraine in order to actually launch the Tomahawks, because again, you can't just hand over a missile and get Zelensky to launch it via a large rubber band tied around a couple of lampposts in Kiev. So if you have to give the launcher system, then you have to provide men who are trained in that launcher system. So who's going to man it is the interesting question. Have the US already conducted training programs for Ukrainians on this launcher system, or is this something which is going to be manned by American personnel? Interesting question. It's interesting if the answer is that they've already trained Ukrainian personnel on the launcher system, because that means the plan was already in place, presumably for at least 6 months or so, maybe longer, to justify training Ukrainians on the system. And it's Americans doing it, then on what basis are they going to be ending up serving in Ukraine? Are they going to be like the rest Foreign Legion that's been over there? Formally speaking, they've left the service of the United States Army, but are essentially working under contract as effective mercenaries. So it's more likely that it's going to be contractors looking for a big payday. Might not get it, given the history of the US-operated missile launcher system. So, for instance, the Patriot batteries that the US has filled Ukraine with, or tried to, have ended up becoming used as target practice by the Russians. They don't intercept much anymore, and as soon as they wheel them out, the launcher systems become prime targets for the Russians. So this was apparently mentioned, according to some reports, about the latest phone call between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump. That Putin mentioned apparently that if these systems were deployed to Ukraine, because the Russians know damn well it's probably going to be US personnel manning them, then they'll end up with US casualties. Of course, this won't be admitted to if indeed it does happen. What you'll suddenly find is reports that, very sadly, some recently resigned US Army personnel or former US Army personnel very sadly died in a car crash which completely obliterated his body. Shame about that. We've given the ashes to the family. Because that's probably what's happened in quite a number of cases with regard to the Foreign Legion, and given how many of them have certainly died over there. Now, Trump was meant to have a meeting, or did have a meeting, in fact, yesterday, or day before yesterday, I should say, with Zelensky. Mr. Zelensky went to Washington again, and according to a frustrated report by the Washington Post, Putin has played Trump again. Now, this is, of course, the Washington Post as representatives of the certain arm of the American state, getting frustrated that the damned Ruskies have fooled that dupe Trump again into another meeting. Now, in reality, this is, of course, a bitch fight between various different factions in the American state. There's those who still laughably wish to maintain the fiction that Trump is some sort of Russian agent, or that he's just bamboozled by Putin. Now, the Washington Post and New York Times are, of course, very upset about this. They make it clear in their coverage of the situation that they want the Tomahawks to be given. Here you see the New York Times story, and they want to see those Tomahawks being given right now. But let's think about this for a moment. Let's think about what difference will the Tomahawk system actually make. Now, it's true that the Tomahawk cruise missile is a more advanced system than the previous US systems that have been given to Ukraine, as far as I can tell anyway. If you, good viewer and listener, know better, then be sure to let me know. However, it must be said that this is yet another dance that's been engaged in by the US, Britain, France, Germany, and the Russians for almost over 3 years now. There's been various different wonder weapons, or Wunderwaffen, to use the good old-fashioned German phrase, that have been given to the Ukrainian side, often operated with Western mercenaries at the helm, that were supposed to turn the corner. Remember the various different missile systems, including the multiple launch rocket systems. HIMARS was meant to win the war on its own for Ukraine. And it started a pattern which repeats to this day, which is the US or Britain or France or Germany or Italy sometimes, but mainly it's those four, gives the Ukrainian side some new weapons. They give them HIMARS 3 years ago. It makes a certain impact for a certain time. The Russians work out how it works. They capture some of the missiles and some of the operating systems intact, strip it down, take it to bits, work out what makes it tick, and develop a countermeasure. They then continue. They said, oh, well, we need something else. We need to give them, remember in 2023, it was the tanks. Remember, the Leopards are coming. That was a meme campaign and a half. We're going to give them Leopards. We're going to give them, Challenger tanks, Challenger 2 tanks. The British are going to give them this wonderful tank, which apparently they give them about 5 of, and 2 of them have at least been destroyed, and the rest seem to be hidden somewhere. The Leopard got largely blown to bits whilst trying to drive through the Russian minefields in the disastrous Zaporozhye offensive of mid-2023. This was going to be the big thing. Then it was, well, we need to give them the Storm Shadow missiles. We need to give them the Scalp missiles, the British and French missiles that have been developed. Well, they did that as well. Got some initial impacts. Russians, I remember capturing at least one Storm Shadow missile that hadn't detonated intact. Again, strip it down, take it to bits, learn whatever secrets it's got, and develop an effective countermeasure. And every time they do this, the same dance is done. Again, same with the ATACMS system. The Germans are still doing a tap dance about whether they're going to send in the Taurus missile system into operation in Ukraine. Merz would probably do it, but his coalition partners are a little less keen. Trump, according to reporting in the Kiev Post, Trump is trying to link a Tomahawk deal for Ukraine for Ukraine to also getting the German Taurus missiles deployed. So again, the unwillingness of the Germans being pressed on by the Americans, and eventually the Germans will give the Taurus missile as well, which I'm told is another variant of the Scalp and the Storm Shadow. It's a German variant of it, similar kind of missile. Apparently, I'm not an expert on these things, but the same process will occur. Let's say that Trump eventually gives Ukrainians the Tomahawk, operated by American mercenaries. Let's assume the Tomahawk will do what all of these Wunderwaffen always do, which is they'll find some big, high-profile targets inside Russia proper, or the Russia pre-2022 borders. They'll find some big targets. They'll hurl a load of Tomahawk cruise missiles at them. There'll be some big pictures that are broadcast in the BBC, on the BBC and CNN, and just to give you an impression as to like how this will be covered on the BBC, I can give you an impersonation right now of how the BBC correspondents will cover it in their usual hushed and annoying tones. If you'll just bear with me one moment, I'll just adopt the persona of an idiot with too much confidence and too much brandy in his veins. Okay, got it. So, assuming that there's the Tomahawk missile has just hit, I don't know, some military or oil installation in Russia. Here we go. For weeks now, the Russian forces have been raining down panic and terror on the streets of Kiev. Putin has thought that his terrorist campaign against the Ukrainian people would go unanswered. But finally, after weeks of hard bargaining, the Ukrainians have the means to strike back. And so they have hit and crippled the Belgorod oil refinery, causing yet another crisis in the Russian attempt to leverage their oil industry to blackmail the world. We now go live to a statement from President Zelensky, etc., etc. It'll be presented as some sort of great triumph. They've hit something. They have struck back at the Russian demon. Zelensky will be seen, I don't know, maybe he'll be playing the piano with his dick again on in the Maidan Square. Ukraine strides forward, victory is near, etc. And this has gone on with every single one of these Wunderwaffen. Every single one. The same dance is done. From the HIMARS through to the... someone said in the comments, not enough passion. I was doing it in traditional BBC. The traditional BBC men save their passion for presumably the brothels that they get into. Now, every single time the same dance goes on, and it'll be the same with the Tomahawk cruise missile, which might be part of the reason why the US military is a little less keen to hand this over. It's been the mainstay of the US's strike force for many, many years now. So they won't be particularly keen on the Russians getting hold of them and working out how to counteract them, knowing damn well that they are, of course, the Russians are providing military assistance and intelligence to, for instance, the Venezuelans, who might be interested in how to counteract a Tomahawk missile. You know, this is one of the reasons why there's a lot of haggling going on inside the US system right now. They're trying to find ways to get around the pressure to do this. But in the end, the Tomahawk missile will go to Ukraine. I have absolutely no doubts about this. It's going to happen, and the same process will be carried through. Now, just to turn to this potential meeting, or this meeting which is certainly going to happen in Budapest involving Trump and Putin. What are the motivations involved here? Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, which I'll just share with you their quote unquote thoughts, Trump betting that personal diplomacy will break the Ukraine war logjam. Now, again, this is a false interpretation. Look, the way in which the American bourgeois press is presenting this is if it's Trump's making this big effort to charm Putin or win him over, and that's the more pro-Trump media. The more anti-Trump media will say that will say that this was tried in Alaska and it didn't work, or that Putin delivered a long, rambling lecture on Russian and Ukrainian history to the baffled Americans, etc., etc., and that's why the summit didn't lead to anything. What actually has happened in Alaska and what's actually happened here is that the US side goes into these things with really one agenda, which is constantly present, and that is to try and preserve the Kiev regime. That's ultimately what the US priority is. Whether that's Trump's priority is another question. Is another matter. I think his priorities depend upon whatever the last person who spoke to him said. But what essentially happened in Alaska was that Trump went in there thinking that there was going to be some kind of concession made, and there wasn't any concessions made. The position of the Russian Federation remains as well as it was expressed in the June 2024 speech by Putin to the Russian Foreign Ministry. I'm just going to post that in the chat so you can all see it. So the position remains not just that all of the regions currently being incorporated into the Russian Federation be vacated by the armed forces of Ukraine and, of course, their NATO handlers, but also that the Russian demands that were made back in February or January and February of 2022 be addressed as well. And those relate to the dismantling, essentially, of the Banderite organizations inside Ukraine, the restoration of the Russian Orthodox, the lifting of discriminatory measures against Russian language speakers, those kind of things. Concessions which Zelensky or whoever replaces him in the end, because there is talk that there is going to be that the US and the British essentially are going to hold an election next year, probably so that they can leverage in some kind of new puppets, again for the purposes of keeping the war going. That's why it's probably going to be Zelensky. Now, Zelensky or whoever is in the presidency in Vancouver cannot agree to the concessions demanded by the Russian Federation. They cannot agree to those. Why? The whole superstructure of the regime, the Maidan regime, would implode and turn in on itself if they attempted to actually denazify the Ukrainian political system. The whole momentum of the Maidan coup regime since 2014 has been it's been powered forward by the bayonet and the armored fist of the Ukrainian fascist organizations. It's been pushed forward by fascist terror, basically. Yes, you've had Poroshenko and yes, you've had Zelensky at the top, but in reality, the enforcement here is done by the armed bands of the Ukrainian fascist organizations. That's who does the dirty work here. And if you, therefore, no Ukrainian president, even if Zelensky wanted to make these concessions, could do that and survive, because these are the chosen men. The fascists are the chosen men of the US and the British imperialists. And you don't go against the chosen men of the paymasters. So they can't do it. Even if there was the political will existed in Ukraine to sweep away the Banderites, well, it couldn't be done given the current balance of forces in Ukraine. They're the best equipped and most motivated troop the Ukrainian regime has. And they're only accepting the reign of Zelensky because basically their masters in Washington and London say that they should. If that support gets withdrawn, Zelensky is a dead man. And Zelensky knows this. So the negotiations between Putin and Trump, what on earth are they meant to actually achieve? Given that we have already seen that Trump is not capable, even if he had the inclination, to pursue some kind of peace agenda. He's not capable of standing up to the forces inside the US state machine and in the wider US ruling class that demand the destruction of Russia, that require it for the stabilization of their system. He's not capable of going against that, nor would he want to, I don't think. He knows where his interests lie, after all. So the question, therefore, is what are they going to attempt at this Budapest meeting? And my prediction is, for what it's worth, that again we'll have the same dance go on. Trump is holding back the Tomahawk threat in order that he can bring it to bear at the meeting with Putin. He'll say, well, we don't want to supply the Tomahawks to Ukraine. We don't want to do it. They're good missiles, great missiles, wonderful missiles. You should buy some. But, I do it. And sanctions, loads more sanctions, tariffs too, etc., etc. Unless Putin and the Russian government agree to basically some variation of the Kellogg plan. And the Kellogg plan is basically, as we've discussed before, a means by which they will try to preserve the Kiev regime. So they're prepared to accept that for now, Crimea is obviously a dead loss. They can't get it back. They know that. That they're going to have to tell the Kiev regime to suck up losing Donetsk and Lugansk. And also, there may be a negotiation to be had over the other regions, Zaporozhye and Kherson, and they will do that in order to try and preserve the Kiev regime, make temporary concessions, then stabilize the Kiev regime, maybe Zelensky. In fact, that seems to be where things are going at the moment. Retool it, rearm it, maybe send some of those Ukrainian refugees back in order that they can assist with reconstruction, in other words, get ready to be lifted, and rebuild things for 5 years' time when the Europeans and the British hope that they've got their military production levels up to a higher level that can sustain a new round of the war in 5 years' time. That's the hope in the West. And on that, the US side and the Europeans and the British are all united as one. They all have these tiffs and rows, etc., and screaming at each other and having meltdowns and engaging in all kind of hysteria. But in reality, they're all agreed on the fact that they want to preserve the Kiev regime. They have to preserve the Kiev regime. They can't allow it to be defeated, because if it's defeated and destroyed, that's a huge blow to Western imperialist prestige at a time when things are already looking shaky for them. They're already losing in the struggle in Africa, as I covered on a live stream just the other day. They are already facing challenges to their rule everywhere, and this is one of the reasons why, of course, they will not make the concessions that Russia desires. They will never make those concessions. The most they will do is basically make some as they would see it, temporary land concessions to Russia. Nowhere near what they, of course, would want. I doubt that they give them the 4 regions or be able to hand over 4 regions without destabilizing the Kiev regime. They may agree to freeze the contact line where it is now, but they won't make the necessary concessions the Russians need on the nature of the Kiev regime. They won't engage in denazification. They may say, I think that Trump would say, that no NATO, but they will say, oh, well, we can't possibly say who Ukraine should have relations with. And the Kiev regime will continue to be integrated into a wider NATO system and attempt to rebuild the Kiev regime's army and have another go at this in free for, I think, 5 years' time, given that all of the official documents from like the Ministry of Defense in this country say we'll be more ready to do something in 5 years' time. I don't think they will, but that's the way they're thinking at the moment. So what can the Budapest talks possibly achieve, given that the objective interest of the United States is in the maintenance of the Kiev regime and its maintenance of that regime as a puppet regime? The Russians require the Kiev regime to be dismantled, not just because it's populated by fascists, but because, as Putin correctly points out in his statement from June 2024, it's been made into a weapon of the West. So how can they reach a compromise here? One side requires the dismantling of the current Ukrainian system, essentially, and it's wrestling out of the grip or that NATO has it in, or the grip that the US and the British, and to a certain extent the French, have it in. The other side requires that to be preserved so that they can come back to this war and try again when they feel stronger. Where's the compromise going to come from? Now, there isn't any there. This is going through the motions. This is, Trump going through the motions. If it had been a Harris administration, there would also be, the only difference is I don't think Harris would ever have met with Putin directly. That would have been too funny. But there would have been discussions under the table about a conflict freeze, because without a conflict freeze, the Kiev regime is fucked, militarily speaking. The only question is, like, where do the Russians choose to draw the line? How far do they intend to go? So this Budapest meeting is going to be another one where Trump says, we had a great conversation, great discussion. He says I won in 2020. Can you believe that? But there'll be no agreement, because you don't have any concessions that either side can make. The US imperialists, for all that Trump may well personally European leaders, and he probably does, he has contempt for them. Well, who wouldn't? He has contempt for Keir Starmer. But I'd ask you to cast your mind back to the program I did a few days back on why the US cannot quit Europe and Europe cannot quit the US. $3 trillion worth of capital going either way every single year. You don't give up that amount of money. You don't give up that market or those markets. So the US can't give up NATO. They can't withdraw from Europe. The idea that the US is going to scale back on its commitments to Europe is a joke. As they get pushed out of other areas of the world slowly, they're going to double down on holding on to what they've got. And what they've got at the moment is all of the European continent, and that's still got an awful lot of wealth in it and an awfully big market. So they're not going to give that up. It's incredibly foolish to ever believe that they would. They're going to keep themselves there. All that they're doing by engaging in this dance in Budapest with Orban presumably as the ringmaster of this particular free ring circus is do another round of pointless talks where Putin goes and reiterates the Russian position, and Trump goes and blabbers and then goes back to uttering threats the next day. So the one, I mean, we should, before pausing for questions and comments, should just talk about the Russian motivations here. Again, we come back to the fact that the Putin system is one system that speaks for a number of constituencies, amongst which still are the constituency personified by that utter wretch, Kirill Dmitriev, who keep trying to sort of give inducements to the Trump administration, saying, Mr. President, how about, bridge between Alaska and Siberia? As Trump hilariously mentioned in the meeting with Zelensky, going, do you like that? Do you like that? A tunnel from Alaska, Siberia, it's really good. It's really good. Do you like it? And Zelensky goes, no, no like. Send Tomahawk now. Send Tomahawk now. Something like that. And so Dmitriev represents like the utterly like debased, rotten, cowardly, pathetic Russian capitalist class that would, again, happily reduce the entire Russian nation to absolute rubble as long as they could continue to do business with the West. That is the nature of the Russian bourgeoisie, just stinking, rotten, pathetic reactionaries. But there you go. But they're not likely to get their way because the balance of forces, I think, inside Russia itself is against them. Dmitriev is there to basically keep the Russian capitalists on side. And Putin is going through this dance. I think full well that there will be no progress in the negotiation, that Trump not only will not, but cannot make any concessions. Zelensky, or whoever is in charge in Kiev, is not in a position to make any concessions whatsoever. And so the dance will be done. Putin will return to Moscow for another meeting of the high command of the Russian government, and will say that they've gone through another round of negotiations, and what's happening will probably be after the meeting, there'll be no concession made. Trump will say to Zelensky, well, now you got it. You got the Tomahawks, you know. And also Blumenthal and Senator Graham, the most repulsive duo since Hale and Pace, will usher forward their mega sanctions bill, which won't work either, but it'll be even more sanctions if they can find any to put on Russia, that they hope will cause an internal crisis. Of course, the US has a significant internal crisis, both economic and political as well, but maybe that's part of the reason why they can't make any concessions whatsoever. Now, the Russians will, of course, then go back to their drawing board or go back to their battle planning. The pro-peace camp in Moscow will be told no concessions were forthcoming, and therefore we have to go ahead to push the special military operation to its ultimate conclusion. And here I will bring my remarks to a conclusion before proceeding to questions and answers. The Russians apparently, I mean, this is according to people who are on the ground in Donbass. I mean, I saw a video from Patrick Lancaster, the independent American journalist who operates with the Russians. He's been claiming there's a big plan in place to get to Odessa. There was talk just the other day that Russian troops were carrying out some kind of reconnaissance maneuvering around Kherson city. Certainly the Russians still have an awful lot of people, an awful lot of men in reserve that they could potentially draw on. So if we go back to, I'll just go back briefly to the deep state map here and show you what I'm looking at here. And this is the map down in Kherson city. You can see the contact line there, and there is a small couple of advances reported around the city this week. Essentially, reconnaissance or probing maneuver by the Russians. But if we look at, I mean, the gaps, the distance from Odessa around the coast to Kherson city, in the grand scheme of things, isn't that large. I mean, they came. They could conceivably, if they'd have gone in greater force, could have stormed all the way down the coast in 2022. That's speculation, though. However, if they're maneuvering around Kherson city, it could be the case that something eventually is being prepared. Now, ultimately, if we go zoom out here, what will it take to knock out the Kiev regime once and for all? What will it take to essentially destroy it completely? Well, I think ultimately two things. One, the severing of what's left of Ukraine from its own coastline, which, as you can see there, in the grand scheme of things, would be certainly a lot of fighting, but it's doable given the amount of forces the Russians now have at their disposal. Taking the coastline down to Odessa, marrying up with Transnistria, would be one way of exerting pressure. That would completely cut off Ukraine's coastal trade, which would be another hammer blow to its economy. The other thing that they, I think, would need to do to really end it would be to essentially take Kiev itself. Because as long as this Kiev administrative center can be maintained, and the Americans and the Europeans and the British will move heaven and earth to maintain it almost indefinitely, it will be, they will keep it in operation. They will keep the Ukrainian government there functioning, even if it means going into gigantic amounts of debt, more so than they are already, even if it means giving loans to the Kiev regime, which will never be paid back, even if it means stealing all those Russian assets that are still in the West. They'll do all of that to keep the Kiev regime afloat. To kill it, you would need, I think, to destroy the source of its governmental power, which still remains in the city of Kiev itself. Take that, essentially following the line of the river all the way down here and all the way to Odessa, essentially cut the place in two. Leave a rump state in the west, which can be then squabbled over by various different Eastern European countries, perhaps. But it would take cutting Ukraine completely off from the sea, taking Kiev itself, symbolizing the total destruction of the Kiev regime. And then you would probably get the Europeans and the Americans and the Brits trying to set up a government in Lvov or something. But it would mean essentially that the Russians would have to take an awful lot more land, which, given that they are at the point where they can move with more rapidity in the West, may be something that they will look to do. Because the solution, so-called, offered by Trump, which is that they're going to have a talk about freezing the conflict again, 5-year freeze, and then what, the US and the Brits and the Europeans try again. Well, that can't be acceptable to the Russians. They need to end this war on the terms specified in the start of the special military operation, but those terms can never be negotiated. They'll have to be enforced. And no Ukrainian government under the current system is going to be able to do that, to make that be necessary for the Russians to end in those terms, for the Russians to end it. So I will pause there and advance through the comments. So who do we have here tonight? We have Working Prole Incorporated on YouTube. We have Shadow Hob on Kick. Hello to you. We have In It For Fun. We have Otis saying a belated happy birthday to the DPRK. Well, yes, it's the 80th anniversary, I believe, of the foundation of the Workers' Party of Korea. 80 years ago today, or this month, so 1945. Pavel says, anyone else feeling true existential dread looking at the overinflated US market? I remember 2008, this will be by far worse. Well, it's worse because essentially, like, all that's happened since 2008 is that they have, of course, not addressed any of the things that caused the 2008 crash. Well, how could they? They have only created a series of asset bubbles since then that continue to inflate and inflate and inflate. So-called AI text being the latest of these. And if that goes down, then the contagion will, of course, hit all other parts of the US economy, because the amount of debt is still horrific. The very low productivity of the economy, very low growth, gigantic money printing exercises having been engaged in over the past 17 years just to try and keep things going. It reaches a point where that no longer becomes effective. So, yes, it's going to be bad if it pops. And that's be one of the reasons why they can't stop the war. They can't stop the aggression against either Russia or China or Iran. This is, or Venezuela, in fact, though they seem to be rather stumped as to what to do about Iran and Venezuela at the moment. But the desperation compels them forward. Now, this is part of the reason why they've they can't quit the Ukraine war, because if you're a US imperial planner, you need to be able to despoil and destroy one of these countries. Now, who is it going to be? You can't do it to China. China's too powerful economically speaking at the moment, and you don't have the forces necessary to inflict a defeat on the Chinese. Iran, well, again, more of a tough nut to crack than the US would have thought, given how badly things went last time for their Israeli proxy. So what do you do? And the only thing you've got left is to continue the war against the Russians and hope against hope that some kind of internal problem causes a governmental collapse in Russia. It probably won't, more than likely won't, but that's really the only card you've got left to play. What do? You try and stage a provocation in Taiwan. Won't go particularly well for the US side at the moment. Again, we can't rule out another round against Iran. Certainly the US is always desperate to restore the rule of either the Shah or something even more pathetic than him. But again, tough nut to crack, not an easy thing to do. So you're left with just continuing the war you're already in, basically. And it all comes back to the fact that the crisis of imperialism, which took on its current form in 2008 and has not stopped. In It For Fun says, can we recognize what Truman lamented as his American Gestapo and its Five Eyes proxies as the gravest threat to civilization? Well, I mean, that's just the tool. That's the thing. The American intelligence agencies and the British, Canadian, Kiwi, and Aussie equivalents, these are just the tools of the empire. Particularly obnoxious tools, yes, but tools nonetheless. They are by themselves merely representations of the power of imperialism. Imperialism requires their service. So I would phrase it differently in It For Fun. I would say that the greatest threat to any kind of civilization is imperialism itself as a system. The various different proxies and agencies and shadow armies it creates to enforce its will, yes, these are all vile creations, but it's the imperialist system itself which is the problem. Hello to Anthony Welch. Hello to Jerry. Hello to James Graham. Hello to Ian Foster. Hello to Walter, Speedy, Brolin, who joins us from Seattle, Washington. Svetlana, comradely greetings to you out there in Moscow. Hello to Nick, who joins us, Nikki, who joins us from Athens. Hello to Callum, who joins us from the Imperial Core London, where he can hear the street protests outside. Is that the Palestine protest or the anti-ID card protest? Both worthy of your support. Hello to Patrick in Bristol, I believe. Hello to Abtin up there in the NATO protectorate of Sweden. Hello to Speedy, who's reading 10 Days That Shook the World. Good choice. And we've got also Chris Casseroles. Can I put the intro music and graphics as a standalone upload on YouTube? Yeah, I don't see why not. I think I can put that on there tomorrow. What else we got here? We have Robeson joining us from Indonesia. Good evening to you, or I should say probably you're 8 hours ahead, so happy Sunday. Hello to Irish Partisan out there in Minsk. Yes, I am a sharp-dressed man with an exercise ball. Yeah, there is no limit to my powers. Hello to Nicole, who's in Ireland, having been in Latvia for 6 weeks. I hope you enjoyed the break. How do things look in the deranged land of the Baltics? Hello to Walter Keating. We've got Robert joining us from Staten Island. We have Richard, who joins us from Bugs's Cafe in the El Cortez Casino in Las Vegas, center of money laundering. Greetings to you, and I hope you're enjoying the show. We have Spiral Alice, who says Carter was also undermined by the state. I never really understand why. Well, the thing is with US presidents, it doesn't matter if they're fucking useless or pursuing a pro-capitalist agenda. There's many different factions in a state machine and ruling class as big and as powerful as the United States. Some of them are more rabidly reactionary than others. Some of them have different sets of interests. And presidents and political factions represent, broadly speaking, slightly different sets of interests. So like the Republicans today in the Trump period, it could be argued, represent, well, of course, they got their Wall Street and their tech backers like the Democrats have, but one of the bases of them, the Republicans, more traditionally had since the Reagan period at least, was that they, to a certain extent, represented more the domestic capital in the United States than the Democrats ultimately, certainly since the Clinton period, because the Democrats became more of the choice of the progressive, liberal, more avowedly liberal wing of the American ruling class, the sort of left liberal wing of the American ruling class, which was more historically based in Wall Street, based in finance, the finance capital businesses themselves, whereas the Republicans still had a bit of that base in the old industrialist sections of the American capitalist class, which reflects the differing priorities to a degree of the coalitions of the different parties. So there's always faction fighting, there's always different agendas in play inside any bourgeois state, but the American one in particular. So you end up with politicians being targeted for interference who are no threat to capitalism whatsoever, but maybe one faction in the US bourgeois decided that Carter's no good for them, or Trump's no good for them, and so actively seek to undermine them. This kind of stuff, battle for influence, plays out all the time. Hello to Tara from Morbid Symptoms Media. Go take a look at the discussion I had with her yesterday. Very interesting stuff. Mr. Xavier Rises says, question, why do multipolar channels still interview Scott Ritter? He contradicts himself all the time. Lack of imagination. Maybe his particular style of apocalyptic hysteria appeals to some people. I mean, we had him on the old audio version of this podcast. How long ago now? January 2022, just before the beginning of the special military operation. When we had him on, he seemed to talk a deal of sense. I didn't know at that stage about his conviction for a sex offense, or and it certainly seems that since the special military operation and his increased profile in them, his apocalypticism has become ever more pronounced. Maybe that's where the views come from. But I would certainly say that, I mean, he's being influenced by different parties here. He certainly seems to be associated with various different, well, certainly some of the reactionary forces inside Russia. Certainly seems to be in league with some of those. Certain reactionary forces inside the United States as well. But I mean, I just find him to be a tedious fool these days. Babbling and raving about, he's been babbling and raving that we're 5 minutes away from nuclear war for over 3 years now. And it doesn't quite happen, does it? Because even the capitalist class aren't suicidal enough to blow up their own world. And it's like, if they could have nuked everybody who was their enemy, they would have done it already. Like, this is nonsense that he's engaging in here. As to why he still goes on these channels, I presume that his appearance still gets a decent sized viewer count. That'll be why it is. It can't be because some of these people think that he's right, because some of the characters who I won't name who have him on claim to be some kind of Marxist. So I must know that he's talking shit. So I can only assume it's because the numbers make sense. That's the only reason why. I mean, he's rambling nonsense quite a lot of the time. Pavel asks, what do you expect from the next crash and its impact on the UK and Europe? We agree that it will be horrific. If the crash in the US is worse than the Great Depression, I see a total societal collapse. Interesting. I mean, what I'm gonna do, Pavel, is I'm gonna take that into a Q&A, because that's too big a question to handle now, because you're asking me to read the runes, so to speak, or read the chickens' innards and provide some kind of prediction. This is, yeah, it's too big a question to answer now. So what I'll do is I'll write down on my notepad here the coming collapse, and we'll do something on it in the upcoming week or so. More about the schedule coming up, by the way. So hello to Dingo Ate Me Baby over on Rumble, which, as I've said before, we are live on YouTube, X, Kick, Rumble, and on Substack today. Found out how to do that. 17 of you watching now, which is rather gratifying to see. So we're going to be live on Substack going forward. So hello to Zukov's Boots. Hello to Fortune Hunter's Wife. Hello to Davey. Hello to MC23 June. What's this institute? Well, I'm glad you asked. This is, of course, the name across the bottle, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao Institute. It's been extended recently. The aim of this, and I think this will be something that it gives us an opportunity to go into what the purpose of this project is. Well, the purpose is again to go back to the very beginnings when we changed the name from Red Star Radio to Marx, Engels, Lenin. The purpose of this has always been to get people to actually study the works of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. So that's why you've got the 5 names in there. They're all incredibly important for the development of Marxism, Leninism. And we, that is I'm going to be not only encouraging people to read them, but also that this should be something that is actively encouraged amongst all those who see themselves as communists. Everybody should be setting aside time for the study of works every day, even if it's just 10 minutes, even if it's just like a few minutes out of any books by any of the big 5 there or something else, something which educates you as to the true nature of the system. That is what we aim to do. So talking about plans going forward, I posted an update on the Patreon site today outlining certain plans to, should we say, introduce a degree of regularity into the programming here, because whereas we do quite a lot of streams here, they are kind of all over the place schedule-wise. I think it would be better for both myself in terms of my own ability to organize and for you as the audience to actually have these scheduled for a regular time in the day. Now, the best time to do these for me is 3 times a week for the Institute, doing longer streams on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. With then, I'll have like the Decline and Fall work being recorded on like Tuesday and Thursday. So there'll be 5 days, possibly 6 days, possibly 7 days a week of content produced, but there will be doing the streams for the Institute on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, all starting, unless, if I've got something on, I'll pre-record at 1 p.m. and running from 1 p.m. nominally till 4 p.m. or something, something like that. Now, the aim of the way I'm going to construct these going forward is to do kind of like a couple of things. There'll be maybe an hour up front of news and analysis from like 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. and then to pause for questions and comments on like the 3 or 4 stories that I've covered in the first hour. And then for the latter part of the program, we'll probably devote it towards some kind of political education lesson. So basically come for the news analysis, news of the day, and then stay for like the political education in the latter part of the program. And that'll vary from day to day. It may be related to the news stories that I cover. It may be something else entirely. So, but by having these scheduled for 3 times a week for anywhere from like 2 to 3, possibly over 3 hours, then that'll actually enable people to put it into their diaries so that the stream's a regularly scheduled thing and it's not hopping around all over the place on the timing. So that's going to be the case from Monday of this week from 1 p.m. Please join me for that. When it's pre-recorded, it'll be probably a video that will go out on a sort of pre-scheduled broadcast. But most of the time, I'll be able to make that live. Tomorrow, we have our analysis of the accursed debate between Zoran Mamdani, Andrew Cuomo, and the living embodiment of America in the 1980s, Curtis Silver, which I watched today, and it was so bad I had to take more notes on it. So I'll be back to look at that tomorrow, and that's going to be like some kind of New York mayoral special. So join me for that. It's in the schedule. So, to go back to the question, the aim of the Institute is to actually get people reading the 5 big names down below. That'll be that's the aim. And that's the reason why this was set up. It's the reason why we're going to continue to develop it. It's the reason why this show exists, basically. Right. Right. Zhukov's Boots says, will Alex ever consider doing a cooking live stream? Good hearty proletarian food like coal cannon or borscht or steak and kidney pudding. I'd need to get a better camera set up, or like hire a camera person to film me whilst I cook something, which I would be afraid to do that, given that I'm not the greatest cook in the world. Not bad, but you know, not camera worthy at this stage. Stephen says Putin tricking Trump is the lib version of Trump strong-armed Netanyahu. Man has never had an original idea in his life. That's very true. Svetlana says Ukrainians have been training in Britain since at least 2022. One is even a friend of my family. So highly likely Ukrainians have been taught how to operate missile systems by now. Interesting. Yes, we remember the stories about Ukrainians training here in perfidious Albion. Balkan Taurus says Challenger tank was slagged off by Ukrainians and unmaneuverable. Right, just BBC impression. Hello to Mike from New England, who enjoyed the episode with Morbid Symptoms Media yesterday. Good stuff. Glad you enjoyed it. Well, Zelensky does sniffing, but not as much as Zizek, to answer the comment from Zhukov's Boots. Walter says, this week in a Canadian national newspaper, if Palestine becomes a state, it should be taken to the ICC for genocide. You read that right. These people are demented, demented propagandists of the most depraved kind. Stephen says Russia took 150 square kilometers in the last 2 days. Ukraine might be finally buckling. Russia has been averaging about 20 for 6 months. Be interesting to see if they do. It might be behind. It is behind Trump's maneuver for a ceasefire. Whether Trump will, though, is another question entirely. I don't think he will. Daryl Tuck says Trump's priority is literally anything that allows him to get any concessions without actually conceding anything himself. Well, that's every American president. So in that sense, Trump is following in the footsteps of all of his predecessors. David King says Trump meeting means a sneak attack on Iran. Well, maybe. Never rule anything out. Though quite what they would do is an interesting question when it comes to Iran, because they have been going back and forth and trying to find some kind of way to get at Iran for, of course, many years. They tried the Israel shock attack was meant to do it. I think the killing of Raisi was meant to do something, and it didn't work. They've played their big shocking cards now. They've blown a lot of their intelligence networks in Iran. So what are they going to do? Given that also the last war ended basically via an agreement with the United States that they would symbolically strike one another, and then that would be it. So what is it that they are going to do here? I don't think the US has an answer. Mike Patrick said, any dismay over Putin meeting with al-Qaeda puppet currently in charge in Damascus, unsettling info regarding extent of Russian betrayal of Syria and Iran, and the put-up job to secure Latakia Port IDF cooperation. Look, I mean, I know that some people like had been, fucking soiling themselves over this, but in truth, so what if Putin met with the, and again, he's not an al-Qaeda puppet, he's a British puppet, a British, Turkish, partially Israeli, but mostly British and Turkish project that runs things in Damascus. And he doesn't even run the great bulk of Syria, to be honest. He runs the presidential palace in Damascus, and that's about it. So the Russians are trying to perhaps secure their bases and presence in Syria. If Giuliani has gone to Moscow, as he did the other day, he's gone with the explicit approval of his at least his Turkish handlers, who I think do a lot of the day-to-day dirty work in Syria. So he's gone there at the behest of Erdogan, basically, with the Brits maybe giving a nod as well. And there's some kind of haggling going on involving the Russian presence there. It also reveals that there's competing agendas between the different factions behind Giuliani, who has no independent role whatsoever. He goes where he's told and he does what he's told, basically. He's told go to Moscow, he goes to Moscow. If Erdogan is figuring out some incredibly complicated maneuver where he's trying to get something out of the Russians, he might be offering them the chance to keep their base in Syria, essentially. In which case, you can't really say that Putin shouldn't have met with him. Now let's deal with this Russian and Iranian betrayal of Syria that, amongst others, the likes of Vanessa Beeley have alleged. I don't buy this, and I don't buy it for particular reasons. First of all, if the Russians wanted to just simply capitulate in Syria, they had plenty of opportunities to do so before the point that they did. What went wrong in Syria, and this is what a lot of these people who got overly invested in the Ba'athist government, this is what a lot of these people don't want to face. What happened in Syria was partially the exhaustion of war and sanctions as waged on Syria for well over a decade by the US, the British, and the Europeans. That's partially to do what happened. But also the internal problems of that Ba'athist-led government, which is, and again, this goes back to the days of the early days of Assad's presidency, when the Syrians in the mid-2000s were pressured into withdrawing from Lebanon as part of the aftermath of the assassination of Hariri, the former Lebanese prime minister. That's the point where things started to go on the slide. That, and of course the concessions to the West that Assad and his government were making over economic matters. So they were starting to follow World Bank prescriptions, starting to dismantle, again, partially at the behest of the imperialists, partially at the behest of the incredibly corrupt and rotten Syrian capitalist class, the socialistic elements that Assad's father had built inside Syria throughout the 70s and the 1980s. And as they started to follow the, shall we say, world prescriptions for the economy in Syria throughout the 2000s, the economy got worse. whilst at the same time, of course, the Americans and the British and the Israelis and the rest of the Europeans were building up their organization level inside Syria so that when the time came, when there was some kind of protest kicked off, they could exploit the instability of that situation and launch their war to remove the Syrian government. Because no matter how many concessions the Syrian government made, just like in Libya, just like in Iraq, just like in Yugoslavia, any standing outside of complete Western control was not to be allowed, which is why the Syrian war started. That and the fact that Assad wouldn't sell out the Palestinian resistance factions. He wouldn't do that. That's part of the reason why the war was launched, as Ehud Olmert actually confirmed, former Israeli prime minister. So, but the problem facing the Assad government was, of course, the sanctions, was, of course, the war. It was, of course, the mass migration of people out of the country, draining the population, draining the economy, and the inability, for various different reasons, of the government to reinvigorate the economy. Because, of course, the US desperately didn't want that to happen. They would have done anything to prevent the economic revival of Syria. But when it came to the collapse, what you found was that the officers, apparently, who had been appointed by Assad to replace the generals who had been winning the war on the ground in the Syrian Arab Army, they proved to be corrupt and incompetent and either switched sides or ran away. And that people in the highest elements of the state also basically had been won over by Gulf state and Saudi money and basically declared that they were switching sides, which is why Assad found himself a man literally without a state, because various people in that government, of which he was nominally the head, switched sides. They switched sides. And that's why it all ended so quickly. And you've got a lot of people who got overly invested in the Assad government, or in Assad himself, strangely enough, who were understandably distraught by this triumph of the imperialists in Syria, so much so that it blinded them to the problems that did exist in Syria. Now, Putin said something quite a number of years ago now, before the beginning of the SMO. In fact, when the Russians first got involved in Syria, he said that they couldn't be more Syrian than the Syrians, meaning that if the Syrians aren't prepared to fight, if the Syrian government can't sustain a fight, then the Russians can't sustain it for them. The Iranians can't sustain it for them. If the Syrian government implodes, then that is a mark of the fact that it's been essentially found to be completely riddled with problems that couldn't be resolved. Russians couldn't prevent that. When the Russians and Iranians saw the speed with which the Syrian government was collapsing, they couldn't do much about it, truth be told. And rather than coping and blaming the Russians and blaming the Iranians for the collapse, the people who are putting these rather elaborate theories forward would do better to interrogate the situation on the ground in Syria as to, well, why did the Syrian government implode so quickly? Because the HTS themselves and their Turkish and British handlers were surprised by the speed with which things collapsed. And it comes back to decisions that were made in Damascus under the influence of the Gulf states and under the influence of the Saudis, who tried the method of money when the method of armed force had not worked. Jerry says, I thought Ben Wallace was en route to the Crimea and the Kerch Bridge. Yes, he's driving his Challenger tank down a highway in southern Ukraine right now. So, yeah, Ben Wallace is a fantasist. So, best just laughed at, really. How can Putin agree to peace until Odessa is again a part of Russia and a border with Transnistria established, asks Ian. I would say that, no peace will be agreed at this stage. Trump can't agree to the Russian demands, as I said earlier, and the Russians can't agree to the kind of nonsense that the Americans want. They can't agree to the preservation of the Kiev regime. So there will be no agreement. Basically, it will be ended on the battlefield. Trump and Zelensky can be impersonated, says Abtin. But Putin, what would a Putin impersonation be like? He has a mild, mellow personality, not flamboyant. He's difficult to impersonate. Zelensky's easy because he just speaks in this sort of completely over-the-top fashion. Now, Trump's easy to do because, again, he's very over-the-top. Like Keir Starmer's easy to do because you just got to speak through your teeth like this and sound like a real weirdo, etc. But yeah, Putin more difficult to do. Nehat says the video game Battlefield 6 is giving away what they think. You can watch the intro and understand what idea is pushed for near future. Basically, NATO abolition. Interesting. I'll have to look up Battlefield 6 now. Stephen says, I saw an article saying Putin was parroting Trump's cultural narrative around Charlie Kirk's death. Yeah. Another pathetic attempt by the Russian bourgeois faction to sort of ingratiate themselves with Trump by sort of parroting his nonsense. Again, best just laughed at, really. Hale and Pace, Svetlana were a unfunny comedy duo from Britain in the 80s and early 90s. I realized that's something of a niche cultural reference that our comrades across the seas won't get. Let's have a look. Hello to Ain Bira from Russia. By the way, for some strange reason on the Restream screen, you are all coming up under like your rather than like names, you're coming up under your YouTube @. So I believe Ain Bira is Lurtis. So hello to you. So I don't know if that's because the YouTube's changed something or what, but you're all coming up under slightly different names. I still recognize the pictures though. Ammo4809 says the easiest nut to crack for the Americans is Venezuela, tons of gold and oil. It is, but it's not. It'd be easier than Iran, and it'd be easier than China or Russia, but it's by no means a guaranteed win. It would be if the Venezuelans make a fight out of it, which I think they would. Yeah, theoretically, the Americans can mobilize a lot of forces and stage an invasion. But again, like what actual level of combat forces do the US have available? The Trump administration and those around them seem to think that they could do a quick bombing campaign on Caracas and the Maduro-led government would collapse. I don't think it would. It's rooted too much in the masses for that, and I think the masses would rally to the defense of the government. What Trump's trying to do is to secure a load of concessions for the US imperialists, by basically just menacing the Venezuelans. That's what he's trying to do at the moment. They can't stage a full-blown invasion of Venezuela because, again, they don't have the necessary troops to do it, and it would be a very, very risky operation anyway. Edward says, is Russia going to launch a big arrow offensive soon and stop grilling Ukraine, or is the unending pressure on the Russian capitalist class going to drag this war out for another 5 to 10 years? I don't think it'll drag on that much longer. Bear in mind, it's not just about disassembling Ukraine. It's also about the fact that the longer it just drags on and on and on, the greater the resources of the Europeans and the Americans get pulled into that. The less they're able to actually make trouble elsewhere in the world. But they will have to bring it to a close. I think that when this Budapest summit fails, and I think it will, you may start to see, I don't know if a speeding up, but it's certainly like some new kind of pace might get set. We'll revisit that when that happens. Okay, right. Gonzalo Lira refused to have Ritter on his show. Yeah, and as Slumbering Colossus says, Ritter called Lira a spook. But it turns out he wasn't. If he'd had been, then he would probably have been extracted from the rather horrible mess he ended up in. Sloboda says the war is just going to go on forever. Well, Sloboda is something of a doomer. I mean, it can't go on forever. There needs to be reach a certain point where Ukraine will just implode. But the Russians will need to end it. There are, of course, differing schools of thought in the Russian system as to how they should. But I don't buy this idea that they're terrified of like Western intervention. I mean, maybe some in the Russian capitalist class are soiling themselves at the prospect of it. But if Western intervention was going to come, it would have come by now. They can't come when they've essentially demilitarized themselves by dumping all their equipment into Ukraine. So I don't buy that idea that it's all because they fear the great march of the French army. It's like as if it's Napoleon's Grande Armée is coming back again. That's nonsense. All right, going down here. I'm going to have to bring things to a close. Hello to Ash. Hello to President Jesus. And yes, the analysis of the mayoral debate will happen tomorrow. Okay, so I'm going to draw things to a close here for today. Thanks to everybody who's joined in. That's let's see, well over yes, for well over 500 of you watching. So tomorrow for the Dani Cuomo Spectacular or Boarfest, one of the two, and then Monday for our new schedule of programming. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. More Patreon content coming up this week. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. And here is the video outro.
Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжаем.